Hi everyone, Professor Bell here, and bringing you a series of lectures. Today's lecture, Persuasive Speaking. So lots to talk about and cover today. I wanted to just give you an oral explanation of these really core concepts of persuasive speaking. I always recall that when I was doing my bachelor's degree in communication studies, there was an entire course and courses, multiple, on the concepts of persuasive speaking. So all that's to say that what you're getting here and now is a very basic edition of persuasive speaking concepts. You can study these concepts for 16 weeks, if not more. There are people who study it their entire lives and dig into it. So lots to talk about, but I think this is a super important concept to understand, not just to check a box and do our speech, but because persuasive speaking is all around us. You are constantly being persuaded. We are constantly just given messages to and from and sharing. You can think of a political scale where two people are debating, right? In an election year, all the more important to understand, right, what is actually being discussed. And then also on a minute scale, right? If you are with a group of friends in a group text and you're deciding where to eat and you have an amazing idea, you are about to be persuasive, whether you know it or not, right? Just the nature of the content of explaining to someone why you should eat at restaurant XYZ will tell you, right, the persuasive nature of communication in those contexts. So earlier in the semester, we talked about how informative speaking is not persuading. Well, persuasive speaking, ironically, has lots of information in there, right? With informative speaking, you're not persuading, but in persuasive speaking, you are giving a lot of information, a lot of support. So it's not just your opinion that you're giving in persuasive speaking, but you're giving information, right, grounded in a specific point of view. And those are the words I want you to embrace as you're looking at persuasive speaking. What is my point of view here? And that's super important. So if you're taking notes, which you should, even if you're listening to this online, because it helps you really understand these concepts and will make it easier to do your outline. If you're taking notes, what I want you to do is first write down at the top persuasive speaking notes, and then the next thing is write down these two important principles. And the two important principles of persuasive speaking is, one, do I care about my audience? And that sounds really weird. Why is that the most important thing about persuasive speaking? And it's actually the number one thing that's going to make you effective. And not a forged care, but a sincere care to really ask yourself, why am I asking my audience to change their mind on any given issue? And have I demonstrated a relationship with them, showing them that I care for them in order to be effective in this? And ultimately, that's what makes someone successful. They have to feel like you care, and that's what makes someone change their mind on a given issue. So maybe you're thinking, Professor Bell, that's not true. Well, I'll give you an example to help illustrate my point. And the example is, think about the one person or two people in your life who can change your mind on any given topic. Okay, think now, who's that person? If you had a restaurant you had picked out, going back to the food example, who can change your mind on where to eat tonight for dinner? Who can change your mind to get you to say, okay, I won't eat here, I'll eat here instead? And think about if there's one or two people you could pick, who would that be? And maybe you're saying no one. But if you did have to pick someone, who would that be? Who could change? Who's that option to change your mind? And probably you're picking someone that you feel like cares about you to some degree or another. Maybe it's your mother or your father, a family member, your significant other. You feel like they care about you, and that's why they can influence a change in your decision. I know when I'm asking for an opinion on something, I'm always going to the people I know that care about me. I'm asking my husband, what do you think about this? Because I care about him and also know that he cares about me, right? So persuasive speaking, number one, as you're taking notes, the audience has to know that you've built a relationship with them, that you're sincere, and that you care about them. And you've been practicing this all semester. A big way we do this is through eye contact. So as you've been making eye contact in your videos, in your delivery, whether face-to-face with an audience, without an audience, right? In your assignments, when you're making eye contact in one way or another, it demonstrates, right, your relationship, your care for the audience, that you want them invested. You are speaking to them, not just burdening them with information. So that's number one. Number two is, okay, and I wouldn't rank this as one is more important than the other. I would say they're both equally important. We're just saying how many there are, one and two. The second top priority, right, is the idea of, am I clear what I'm persuading them? Have I taken a clear point of view on this issue? So this is kind of two-part. The audience can't be persuaded on something if they don't know where you stand on a given issue, okay? So you have to be clear, whatever your topic is, to be a specific point of view. You're either for or against, okay? And it doesn't have to be a hot button issue. It doesn't have to be a political issue. Some of us may not feel comfortable talking about that, and that's okay. But instead, right, you do have to take a clear stance on whatever you're speaking about. So that's the idea that we're going with here. And you want to be really thinking about from now, as you're going through topics in your mind, what am I asking the audience to do with this? What is my, what we like to call in public speaking or persuasive speaking, call to action? What is my call to action? So with that very lengthy introduction, let's start on this concept of persuasive speaking. So the first point here is the background of rhetoric. So rhetoric is the art of persuasive speaking, right? So when someone's asking you a rhetorical question, that means there's a guided or an intended answer. They're referring to something. They have a predisposed answer for you to kind of think on, right? Like they're already saying yes or no, and directing you toward an answer. It's persuasive. So my question to all of you is, as you're sitting and reading and listening to this, how are these three individuals connected? So maybe, right, you're saying they're philosophers, they're all Greek, right? Those kinds of things. But really what it comes down to is that Socrates was the teacher of Plato and Plato the teacher of Aristotle. And that's important to know. And think of them as the forefathers of persuasive speaking, the forefathers of not just philosophy, but of rhetoric, which is persuasive speaking. And they influenced one another in their understandings and teachings on persuasive speaking. So generally, as philosophers, they were seeking to find the existence of truth. So what is true, right? What is true? So we can define truth as something maybe that's unchanging. And Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle defined this in a different way, right? So one may have seen truth, right, as a universal truth, unchanging, whereas Aristotle, right, might have seen it in a different way, which they did. And we won't get to the details of that now, but we just want to acknowledge, right, that they each saw these things in a different way. They were all connected because they were teachers and students of one another, influenced one another, and also had their own positions on these topics. So the main thing we want to know is they're connected. They all influence the ideas of rhetoric, and they kind of set the foundation of our discussion today in one way or another. So what is persuasive speaking? I already gave you a context and a background, but persuasive speaking has a goal, right? And that goal is to influence the attitudes, the beliefs, and behaviors of another individual. So our attitudes, right, is how we see something, good or bad, right or wrong. Our beliefs, right, is what we hold to be true about the world. And our behaviors are actually how we live out what we believe and what we value. So it really kind of stems from the belief is the root of it. Because of what we believe, we have certain values, and our behaviors, what we act out, stem from our beliefs and our values together. So it's kind of like the outward manifestation of our beliefs and values. So one thing we want to make clear when we're persuasive speaking is that persuasive speaking is not coercion. Okay, what is coercion? Maybe you're thinking about. It's not forced, right? It's not manipulated. It's not forthcoming out of threatening behavior. But persuasive speaking, right, is to influence, is to tell your audience, because I care about you, here's why this is a better option for you, right? But even if it's a better option, even if maybe the audience is not in a good situation and you're trying so hard to help them and you're doing everything you can with your explanation to show them why, right, your point of view is more helpful to them or better for them, at the end of the day, we have to be content with the audience's liberty of free will, right? Everybody has the freedom to decide what they want to do for themselves. And that is really good for you as the persuasive speaker, because I think that way you can go into persuasive speaking really a lot more relaxed, meaning, okay, my intent is to share with you what's best for you, but if you decide you don't want to do that, then really that's on you, right? So I always say that when you're speaking, when you're communicating, and especially when you're persuasive speaking, I'm responsible for the message. I'm not responsible for the response, okay? And we don't mean that in a negative way. That means that as the speaker, I am fully responsible for what I say. That means I really am giving my best effort to check the ethics, the support, the factuality of all the content that I'm sharing, and I'm doing my due diligence. But ultimately, right, I'm not responsible for their response, meaning if they decide to not do it, whatever the circumstance, you have to leave the choice up to them. So going into it, right, you do the best that you can, but if they decide no, then their no is no, right? Or they decide yes, then their yes is yes, right? So we respect their decision and we respect the audience's liberty, and that's kind of our little ethics sidekick. So every persuasive speech has a proposition. So when someone's proposing to another in marriage, right, they're asking a question with a hoped answer, right, with a almost, I don't know if you want to say persuasive answer, but I don't know that many people that go to the lengths of proposing to their significant other if they didn't want them to say yes to the will you marry me question. So that's kind of an example to illustrate that point. So you have set propositions of fact, value, and policy, and you have set before the audience why they should agree with you, right, and disagree with the opposition on one of those three facets. And the first one is a proposition of fact. What is a proposition of fact? So a proposition of fact will tell us its truth value. Is something true? Is something true? A proposition of value, right, test is something good or bad. And a proposition of policy test should something happen. So you're testing for truth. You're testing for is it good or bad, right or wrong. And then the last, again, to review, you're testing if something should happen, if it should take place. And this is kind of like a very boiled down explanation of them, but it kind of helps us see it in an overview perspective. So there's more on that in the textbook if you want to reference to it. And if you have questions already, it's important that you stop and ask me. I hope also as you're writing your notes down, you're also writing not just the bulleted phrases, but you're also writing my explanation of each of them. So if you didn't do that, that's important to do. So, theories of persuasion. As I stated, there are many, many theories of persuasion, but here is three really important ones. One is social judgment theory. Two is expectancy outcome values theory. And three is inoculation effect. So the first one is social judgment theory. And this is essentially assessing where your audience stands on a given issue. So when you have the social judgment theory enacted, you're saying, right, and you're assessing that all audience members are one of three categories, right? They're either a receptive audience, they're either a refuting audience, rejecting audience, right, same thing, or they're neutral. So they're accepting, they're refusing, or they're neutral. So you have to figure out where your audience stands on this particular issue that you're persuading them on. And then you can get a better idea of who you need to be persuading to. So I want you to take a second to think about, okay, if you were persuading to an audience, which type of audience member is the most persuadable? And I don't think that's a word, but I'm going to use it, okay? Which one is most likely to be persuaded? That's a little more eloquent. And so is it the accepting audience, the refuting audience, or is it the neutral audience? So think of one of those three, and really your answer to that question is your neutral audience is who you're persuading, because they are the only audience member who has yet to make a decision on a given issue. So your accepting audience already agrees with you. You just remind them why they agree. Your refuting audience is just really determined to oppose you. So you're just going to really exhaust yourself trying to change their mind when they've already really been fixated on being against you. So really you want to spend majority of your efforts persuading the neutral audience according to research and theory. So social judgment theory is just kind of giving us a perspective. Our audience members that we need to be persuading is that neutral audience, the ones who have yet to make a decision. And you can refer back to the concepts of audience analysis on how to address who your audience is, where they stand on the issue, and how you can specifically tend to that group or subgroup, I should say. So the second theory of persuasion that we want to use as we're writing our speech is the expectancy outcome values theory. And this is essentially stating that when your audience is listening to you, they are constantly evaluating, right, the risk and reward of the concept that you're trying to persuade them. So they're saying, what is it costing me, right? And cost could be time, money, energy, strength, people power, right? How many people are involved? All those things. And then what am I getting out of it? And the audience has to feel like their reward, right, is greater than what they're putting into it. So this is important to mention as you're persuading your audience. You're telling them up front what the benefits to them are. And this happens to us all the time when we're getting a credit card offer in the mail, right? Those pesky credit cards. Hopefully you're not like a pesky credit card company. But the idea, an example is they're telling you if you sign up today, right? The cost to you is nothing financially, and we'll even give you 75,000 reward points that are equal to a 3-night stay in Cancun, right? Or wherever, if you could travel anywhere. So that's kind of the idea. So for example, if I told everybody you would get an A on your persuasive speech if you just showed up on Saturday morning to help clean up campus, and this is hypothetical, not true, but hypothetical. If you just showed up for one day and helped clean up our campus, you're all getting A's on this next large assignment for the class, right? Because I've told you that the reward is greater than the time you're going to spend on Saturday morning, the one day that you can come in, clock a few hours, the reward, which is a grade that you're desiring for an assignment, is greater, right? Maybe in your mind, because it's greater, then you're more likely to do it, right? Again, hypothetical scenario illustrating the point. So last thing is inoculation effect. And if any of you watching have a background in nursing, you know that inoculation is another word for a vaccine. So if we look at it medically, a vaccine is a dead or dying virus that's injected, right, in order to help build antibodies or immunities to a person receiving, right, some sort of disease or virus in the future, so that when they were in the chance that they got that disease or virus in the future, then their body has already built an immunity to it. They can attack against it. They're ready to fight it. And the same concept and idea is true in persuasive speaking, is we have to, and we all have to do this for our specific persuasive speeches, we have to not only persuade why the audience should agree with us, but we take the main, right, at least the main counter argument from the other side and address to why that might be incorrect, okay, or why it's not true, right? You have to address that. You can't ignore it, because what happens is then the opposition comes and undoes everything you've just explained to them. So not only do I have to tell you why you agree with my side, but I also have to tell you what the opposition is going to say and why that may or may not be true, right? And that doesn't mean you have to bash them, right? That's going to be coming up in a second here. But really the idea there is to address the opposing person's side and not ignore it, so your entire argument comes full circle. So moving along is this concept of persuasive appeals. So persuasive appeals, developed by Aristotle, was really a tool to help decipher between right and wrong, or in deciphering truth, right? Truth may not always be obvious, but we have tools like this, again, developed by Aristotle, to help us dissect truth, meaning to evaluate, right, how valid a concept or topic is. So here we're looking at these three that you may have learned in a previous class, maybe in English: ethos, pathos, and logos. So ethos is our credibility, pathos is emotion, and logos is logic and fact. Okay, so if we're looking at the ethos is really important. We do this outwardly and implicitly when we're speaking. So explicitly, you do this in public speaking when you come up in front of the audience, as you're required to, and share why you're qualified to talk about the topic. So at the beginning of every semester, on the first day of class, I share with my students, "Hi everyone, my name's Professor Bell. I'm here to teach you some principles of public speaking. I'm qualified to teach this class because I have a master's degree in public speaking or communication studies." Now that's great. Education and explicit credibility is really important. But the most important credibility we can establish is our mastery on the content. So for example, if I came to class on the first day and I told you I had a master's degree in communication studies, but I couldn't answer any of your questions about public speaking, then you probably wouldn't take what I said on the topic as valuable or believe me. So that's the most important thing as you're establishing ethics or your credibility, your trust with the audience, the ethos, is make sure that you've mastered and fully understand what you're sharing with them. You've done your homework and you're establishing that implicitly throughout. And there's minor things to ethos that the audience also evaluates. In the beginning of this lecture, I talked about the idea of ethos also being showing to the audience that you care about them, that you value them, right? And different things, right? It could be maybe depending on the situation, if it's a business professional situation, how you're dressed, if you're just business professional, right? Those kinds of things. The second persuasive appeals I'm going to talk about is pathos, is the audience's appeal to emotion. Now, if we were building a argument cake of these three principles, I would say the most important, the actual substance of the cake part, is going to be the logos, the facts, the support, okay? The icing on top is the pathos, and you got some sprinkles as ethos. So you just kind of illustrating the point, maybe that's making you hungry, but illustrating the point of how the logos is that concrete part, but you do need all three. Nobody wants a dry, boring looking cake that you can't Pinterest, right? You need all three, and I'm being jokey, but you know what I mean. You need all three. So pathos is important because the people that you're persuading are human. So we have emotion in us. We have feeling. So emotion is that part you need to touch that finally moves your audience into an action portion, that they're going to be doing something about what you're asking them to do. But before you do that, you have to move into the logos really concretely, really establishing facts, statistics, data, and ensuring that the information that you're getting is not from a biased, one-sided source, that it's verified by multiple different sources, that it's factual. And that's why we cite 6 to 8 sources for our persuasive speech, because we need to see that fact is consistent throughout many different places and it's verified, right? That's really important. So we can often overuse pathos, and what usually happens is it drives the audience away and makes them not really persuaded, or if they are persuaded, it's for a temporary time. So for example, if you are listening to a commercial, think about commercials you watch where too much emotion is used, right? Maybe you're thinking about the ASPCA commercial. And there's nothing wrong with that organization. That's great. I think it's awesome that they help. But when you're overusing emotion, probably what happens is most of you change the channel, right? Most of you are not calling in for a donation. And awesome if you are, but the majority of people, right, get turned off from overusing emotion, right? Cue the Sarah McLachlan song and everyone's like, okay, I'm already sad enough on its own. I don't need to add more to that right now. And seeing a sad crying cat is really not helpful, right? It just makes me more sad. So you want to be careful in how you use pathos. And again, we don't want to remove it, but we don't want to overuse it. You want to be balanced in your pathos. So here are 3 videos on ethos, pathos, and logos, and I call this game Name That Appeal. I'm going to play these videos for you here so you can watch it all in one shot, and then when you need a reference to them, I'll put the links to this in our video section as well. So here's video 1. I want you to be thinking or just saying out loud as you're watching this, which appeal is this? Is this pathos, logos, or ethos? And I mean predominantly. So let's watch video 1.
I wish I could ask you, how was your day? We may be different, but also the same. Close we could be, just you and me, and together feel the love.
Okay, so if you were watching that, you're probably thinking pathos. If you were thinking pathos for our first video, you would be correct. Anytime you see a cute animal and a baby, combined into one. It's pathos, right? So let's watch the second video and see what predominant appeal they're using. And I'm sorry in advance because oftentimes after we do this, we can never watch a commercial the same way again. So you're always like, that's logos, that's pathos. But I think that's a good thing because it makes you knowledgeable on the persuasive nature of things. So let's watch video number 2.
If this is how your child feels after losing you for a minute, just imagine if they lost you for life.
Okay, that one was a hard one to watch, and if you were thinking about it, that one as well is definitely predominantly pathos, right? You see the little boy crying, and it's just so sad. Predominant use of emotion. So let's look at the third and final video of Name That Appeal, and then we'll kind of bring it all together.
It's like having fuzzy slippers on your teeth, but the real word for it is plaque. And that news came straight from the dentist. His advice, switch to Colgate Total.
When I saw a little pink in the sink, I thought, I'm just brushing too hard, no big deal. Then the dentist said a little bleeding is a sign of gingivitis and to switch to Colgate Total.
Only Colgate Total has an antibacterial ingredient. It attaches to teeth to form a protective shield that's clinically proven to protect against a complete range of oral health problems for a full 12 hours. No other toothpaste can do that. Only Colgate Total reduces plaque by up to 98% and gingivitis by up to 88%.
Okay, pause the video because you get the idea here. Obviously, there's two predominant Name That Appeal here, and the number one is the logos. They're using a lot of percentages and statistics, and also subtly a lot of ethos because they're using the lab coat, the guy that looks like a dentist, even though in small font it says actor portrayal of a dentist. You get the idea, right? They're trying to establish numbers and credibility, trust, right? That logos and ethos. So that's an example of how we see, right, messages being given to us and that basic use of the ethos, pathos, and logos, right? And we want to include all three of those things in our arguments. We want to include, right, our trust with the audience, and that also includes our due diligence to find really good information, reliable information. We want to establish statistics, facts, definitions, concrete data, and then also, right, that appeal to emotion. The story of the one. How does this affect you? Why should I even do anything about it after hearing all these numbers? And that's the ideas that we're working through in an argument for persuasive appeals. So as we're moving along in our explanation here, we also want to take a minute to look through the fallacies. And the first fallacy, and here are Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, just really frustrated by all the faulty and false arguments in the world. And there are different ways we can partake in false arguments, but here's a chart that describes all the different kinds of fallacies. We're just going to cover a few. The first one being bandwagoning fallacy. So here we see a picture of McDonald's really participating in bandwagoning fallacy. So bandwagoning is when we say something is true because it's popular. Maybe this has happened when a sports team you never followed before won a series, the World Series or something. And all of a sudden, people are fans of that team, right? Something is true because it's popular. So here in this McDonald's example, they proclaim billions and billions served. So they're saying because we've served billions and billions of hamburgers, we have to be the best, right? That means we're the best tasting. It's true, right? It's good because it's popular. And we know that's not true because the best tasting hamburger of all time is In-N-Out Burger, right? I'm going to get in trouble for that one because we live in the state of Texas, but you get the idea. So the second fallacy, a very commonly held one, is ad hominem fallacy. And here's our little meme of the day, and it says, an ad hominem attack? Your argument must be really strong. So obviously we're being sarcastic, but when we participate in ad hominem attack, we're attacking the person and their character instead of the content of the argument. And boy, do we see this a lot in our world today, whether on social media, in politics, right? And it can be infectious, and we can catch ourselves unknowingly, unwillingly participating in it, right? Not even realizing. But the idea here is it's important, right? Not to attack somebody. So if you are having a conversation with a friend, and again, back to our food examples, and you're deciding where to go for takeout for lunch, and you say, I want Olive Garden, and your friend says, well, I wanted Domino's Pizza. And you say, well, you always pick the worst places. You've picked really bad places in the past, and you really just don't know how to pick a restaurant, right? You've now participated in an ad hominem attack because you're not arguing any longer why Domino's and Olive Garden are better or worse choices, but you're now just attacking the person and their character and their inability to make a good decision in the restaurant world, right? So that's kind of the idea that we're working with. And you want to always give, right, respect to the opposing side, because I think that's important to do, especially because it adds to your own credibility. So here in his argument, he's saying your argument must be really strong, obviously in a sarcastic way, because when you revert to attacking a person, right, it just makes it seem like you didn't have a good enough argument, that you had to attack the person, right? That you're ignoring the content, you're diverting the content to attack the person, which entails you don't have a solid argument. So stick to the facts. I love that Daniel Webster says, keep cool. Anger is not an argument. So oftentimes we can see that the moment somebody gets angry in an argument, they've already lost the argument. So if we're just kind of digressing for a second into conflict management, we know that when you take a moment away, if you're heated with emotions, emotions are human, okay? They happen. You can't ignore them. You can't prevent them not all the time. But if you just step away and take a second to calm down and tell the other person, if there's someone involved, that you need to take a step back and you'll come back in a day to reconvene with them, then you are more likely to be able to level-headedly discuss and or win an argument. So word of advice in terms of conflict management is, if you're angry, don't argue. It just puts you in a vulnerable position and actually a defeated position to argue. So the third fallacy is begging the question, and this is circular reasoning. That means your support and the premise of the argument are just going in circles. You're not actually saying or proving anything. So if I said Spam is the best tasting food that ever existed because in history of all the world, nothing has tasted better, I've actually proven nothing, right? I haven't actually given you a reason why Spam is better. I haven't given you a statistic or an idea of why people think it's the best tasting food that's ever existed, but I'm just kind of reverting the same statement twice in two different ways to make you feel like I'm arguing, but if you look closely, no argument is actually being proven as true. So we don't want to go in circles when we're arguing. This is important. Here we have slippery slope fallacy when we're saying one thing happens as a result of another without a connection, an obvious connection between the two. So let's play this DirecTV commercial to kind of illustrate the point of this fallacy. And they use it humorously.
When your cable company keeps you on hold, you get angry. When you get angry, you go blow off steam. When you go blow off steam, accidents happen. When accidents happen, you get an eye patch. When you get an eye patch, people think you're tough. When people think you're tough, people want to see how tough. And when people want to see how tough, you wake up in a roadside ditch. Don't wake up in a roadside ditch. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV.
Okay, so funny because this ad is telling us, right, that if you don't get DirecTV, you'll end up in a roadside ditch. And they're using the fallacy of slippery slope humorously to kind of illustrate the cause and effect of how one thing led to another. But obviously we know that those things are not related. If you don't have DirecTV, which I don't, I am not going to end up in a roadside ditch. At least I hope not, right? So slippery slope. If you're saying something, make sure that they're actually connected. You have to find support to connect them. So again, in another example, if I say, I got sick because I ate bread last week and I eat bread every week of my life, there's no connection to know that's what that caused my ailment or sickness. But if I say I ate moldy bread last week and that's what made me sick, that has more causality to it. So the last thing we want to look at is appeal to authority. And this is also something that we saw in that Colgate doctor commercial. But when authority is used to say something is true because someone who has authority in the topic is saying it. So here we have Kylie Jenner saying fit tea is the way to perfect female figure, and people believe it's true just because she has some sort of popularity or authority. I use that term loosely on the topic, right? And obviously she's not a medical professional, right? But people appeal to the platform that she has, and that's kind of the concept. We can't just take something for truth just because someone who has the platform says it. We have to actually dissect it, right? And actually find the people who have a real authority on the topic. So last thing we want to talk about, persuasive organization methods. The first one, explaining what's the problem, because you have to tell the audience why there's a problem, what's causing it, and how they can help solve it, right? And then second is causality, where you're explaining reasoning, right? But you always, if you're explaining with the reasons to why they should agree or disagree with you, or why something is a problem or not, has to end with a call to action. What are you asking the audience to do? Are you asking them to change their mind on a position? Are you asking them to sign a petition? Are you asking them to donate blood or donate their time, their hours in volunteer work? So be very, very clear what you're asking the audience to do about the given topic. So that's persuasive speaking in a nutshell. I tried to keep it as brief as possible, and here we are, 43 minutes in. But if you have any questions or need me to specifically look at your argument, feel free to message me or email me, and I'm happy to help.